All right, it is the stroke of 11 a.m. Central Time. So good morning, and what's left of it anyway to all that are on. We've got a pretty good chunk of participants that registered and are on. We actually hit max capacity on this, which was great to see. I'm going to do a little bit of housekeeping and some introduction here for a minute or two and let a few people log in and get settled as I go along. I guess to start off with, I love questions on these things, and questions, have a unique way of bringing out more information from me than I really would have built into the session on its own. So that's the fun part, and that's what makes these things unique and different every time. I want to give you an idea how I want to handle them here. Normally, I would have a separate moderator, and I like to take questions all throughout the webinar. In this case, what I'd like you to do, I've got the panel open, and I can see your questions as you ask them. And I've got a slide built into this presentation about 3/4 of the way in after we get through some meaty information, and it will prompt me to answer questions. And so what I'll do is I'll maximize that screen and take a look at all the questions and answer them one by one and try and get through them all. That way we have plenty of time. And then once I've gotten most of those taken care of, then I'll go back and finish the last few slides of the presentation and we'll go on. Another housekeeping item is, this is a new format for me. I'm not promoting a product. This is really an advocacy piece for me. I've always been an advocate of living walls in all forms, and I'm continuing that with this webinar series. And of course, now I'm a consultant to the industry, the design industry. And so I'm trying to offer services to architecture firms, engineering firms, landscape architecture firms, and even contractors and design build firms in terms of helping them get good specification, product selection and execution, and even field installation, get that done well so that the walls that they specify reach their intended end. And so as part of that, I'm offering information on a regular basis through my website, greenwallventures.com, through my Greenwall Mojo blog, which is probably twice a month a blog post I'll do, which is hosted through my website. And I'll try and cover topics and maybe get a little bit deeper than I would in the webinar. Oftentimes, you've only got an hour, and it's hard to really get too deep into something. As part of this, I'm going to run a poll, a 7-question poll, right as we start handling the question and answer session. And those 7 questions will help me understand my audience and help me hone future webinar sessions. So also at the end, I'm really happy to get your chats or questions regarding upcoming topics, what you'd like to see more of, what you'd like to see a deep dive in. So this will be the kind of thing that around the middle of the month, every month, I will do one of these, and they're free. I should also mention, when you signed up, if you read everything, and there was a lot, you probably saw that I'm going to send out within the next couple of days a certificate of attendance. So those that self-compile for continuing education credits, that will be useful. In the future, I do have some sessions that I'm submitting for a continuing ed accreditation with ASLA, AIA, USGBC. And so over time, I'll start to offer some of these that count through those organizations for continuing education as well. So, I'm hoping for big things with this. I think that living walls are hot, and you hear about them all the time. You see them more and more, but I think there's still a lot of mysteries about how to go from the drawing board to 2 or 3 years down the road with successful performance. That leads me into a short bio. I'm the presenter today. My name is Mark Woolbright. I'm with Greenwall Ventures, LLC, which is a living wall consulting firm based in St. Louis, Missouri. I am a longtime advocate of living walls. 25 years ago or more, I patented my first living wall system. It was a concrete structural block system that was designed to, take plants and grow itself over. And since then, I've patented a number of products and systems and methods of manufacture, all in the living wall green building arena. And I've also owned and operated a number of different corporations over those years that brought those products to market. Most recently, I was the Living Wall Division Manager for Filtrex International. Filtrex wanted to have a living wall division, and so I went on board with them to increase their product offering and fire up a division for them. And I had a lot of fun doing that. It increased my reach. It enabled me to work with a much larger distribution network and nationally. And all the products that came out of that were all lightweight and shippable and available all over the country and in other countries. So it was a great stop for me. Now I'm moving on as a consultant, and I'm really enjoying this phase of things where I get to be an advocate full-time for living walls. So with that said, if anybody is having any technical difficulties, you can't hear me, something's not quite right, shoot me a chat message or ask a question through the interface. Otherwise, I'm going to assume it's all working great. That's the only trouble with a webinar is I'm talking and I really can't get the feedback from you guys. I can't see you or hear you or anything. So anyway, use the interfaces if you need to and give me some cues. Otherwise, I am going to kick this off and I'm going to assume that you can all see my screen and we're ready to go. So this is the first in the Living Wall success series, and obviously, living walls is a humongous topic and I can't cover it all here, so I'm giving a short overview and then I'm going to dive into what I think are some of the most important questions a designer or someone that's about to specify a living wall needs to ask. And I'll admit, on the front end, they're more centered, the questions are more centered along the lines of a structural or landscape living wall than a vertical, but they do also apply to the vertical. And as we go along in the series, we'll cover it all. So why select living walls and why do I love them so much? That's kind of the big deal. And if you read my blog on the Greenwall Ventures website, my most recent blog post talks just a little bit about how I went to Europe with a backpack after I graduated college a long time ago. And I saw living walls over there and they really bit me. And I've been fascinated with the way plants can modify a typical structure in beautiful ways, in functional ways, in environmentally beneficial ways. So, really the minute the word living is used, it becomes all about the plants and what they bring to the structure. So, you've got a wall that doesn't say anything, but you have a living wall. Obviously, it's going to have plants, and for it to be a living wall, the plants have got to get alive, grow it over, and stay that way for the long term, or you're not getting the benefits intended. And so that's really my focus, because if designers and specifiers and even owners are successful, they design it and it works out exactly the way they intended, then they're more likely to use a living wall over and over and over again. So that's why I speak at conferences and I love doing webinars like this as an advocate for the niche. So plants have always fascinated me, and their ability to transform the perception of a typical structure has been my mission for many years. I'm always trying to get something to grow over with plants at an angle of inclination that might not be normally seen in nature. So in design circles these days, we're inundated with the buzzwords like biophilia, biomimicry, green space, ecology, sustainability. And although they're not all about plants, plants are central figures in all of those buzzwords. words, especially biophilia, you know, and that's the naming of bringing plants into close proximity of humans, where they work, where they live, for a whole host of benefits. And there are organizations such as Green Plants for Green Buildings, Green Roofs for Healthy Cities, that are really great advocates for this, in addition to what you might normally see coming out of like the U.S. Green Building Council or Sustainable Sites or something like that. So anyway, you're hearing a lot about these things. And so, you know, humans are embracing plants in our spaces like never before. They're finding ways to pull them into close proximity, you know, putting them inside buildings, on the buildings, either outside the building attached to the wall or inside the building attached to the wall, not just plants in planters. They're getting plants as part of streets and streetscapes. They're using living walls along highways, and they're even greening rooftops for a myriad of benefits there. I mean, there's benefits in you know, urban heat island reduction, absorption of runoff water, you know, habitat, green space. There's just so many different things, but also they're growing plants on a rooftop for food, and that now comes into food security and locally grown food, and knowing where your food comes from and how it was grown. So all the benefits and intentions of a living wall are achievable. I've seen it done many, many, many times. If a specifier fully understands and controls the variables of a proposed living wall, they can achieve all the benefits aesthetically and environmentally. Now, I've made a lot of presentations to design firms over my career thus far, and I always run across firms or individual designers that have tried to design some living walls of one configuration or another, and they haven't worked out, and they found them to be problematic. They're now a bit gun shy of a living wall. Clients are asking for them more and more, and so designers have to be more aware of the types and the, you know, the ways to select the right product for the right application, and then guide it all the way through to success a few years down the road with a fully grown over performing wall. That can be intimidating, and this webinar will start to offer some good strategies for product selection, and we'll discuss several determining factors in good product selection, which is sort of an early marker of success. If you start right with the base of the pyramid is right, you know, all the other variables are less difficult, I should say. So I love that living walls come in many forms and service capacities, you know, but all of them depend on healthy plants for success, every single one of them. A lot like these beauties I'm about to show you next. So living structural walls for roadways and bridges. That's a stunning application right there, where the living wall is, well, in fact, if you look closely, there's non-living walls, there's some block walls in there, there's some MSE panel walls, and they're there because they have to be vertical, and they need that kind of structure holding up a bridge. But on either side of that vertical structure, they have room to slope it back a little bit, and they've shifted to living walls, and then they've grown these structural walls holding up a pedestrian street, pathway, I should say, with a series of vines and native plants, and it's stunning. And living landscape walls for site grade changes that affect the building. I mean, on every building project, you know, there's always inundations of the land, and so the engineer has to figure out where they're going to break the grade to create their parking and such. And a lot of times that creates the need for a retaining wall, structural retaining wall, to hold back the earth. And many times a good choice could be a living retaining wall as opposed to a non-living retaining wall. But if the designer doesn't know about it or doesn't have good comfort in the execution, they're not going to make that selection. So that's why I continue to advocate. This wall right here enables a grade change so that the building pad can be set. And this is a really nice piece of Class A office space. And all the tenants in the lower level look out through their windows, and their day and their view is impacted by plants, not concrete. And it's just awesome to look at, but it's also awesome to be in the building and occupy the building. So this would be, oddly enough, this is an old application, but it's a great example of biophilia, let's say, and they're not, the plants are not in the building, but they affect the building and its occupants. Living landscape walls can function in any climate or region. This is out in California, and this is just a 4 to 5 foot tall wall, but there is a structural wall in there. And I guess the point I would make is microclimate analysis and local plant species need to be looked at very closely. And if done correctly and guided by the intent from the owner and designer of the outcome of the wall, just about any region of the country can have living walls to be very successful. Living steep slopes for erosion control and habitat restoration. This is obviously a very large industrial wall along the bank of a river, so it's performing erosion control. It's very structural by its nature. It's holding up the power generation towers there. But it's also an opportunity for habitat restoration and the introduction of native plants back into the landscape, which is always a great choice. Living walls come in all shapes and sizes, wire walls, concrete crib walls. I resisted the urge to showcase some old rubber tire walls. And I've seen some really good looking ones, and I've taken some good pictures of them too. You don't hear a lot about them because there's not a vendor out there that's selling old tires to be used as a retaining wall, but it can be done. And then, of course, there are several others that I don't have in here. Lots of different kinds of block, living walls that don't have any type of hard structural facing, even cellular confinement or GeoWeb type of walls on an embankment. I've seen to be very successful if all the variables are considered and they're handled right. Living walls can be vertical. And in this case, that's me standing in front of a vertical living wall at a farm. And this is an organic farm. And so they can be used inside of a building, outside of a building, even on roofs for food production and to use the space more wisely. And vertical living walls for small spaces, small private spaces. Take a look at my mouse here. I mean, that's a stunning wall. Obviously, there's an outdoor fire pit, and this is in close proximity to where people are going to use this patio. And then, of course, the other wall is large public spaces. This is the atrium of a building, and that's another stunner there. So the term living wall covers an awful lot of area. So my perspective on living walls is very different, and I think this is the key thing that makes me a very interesting advocate for living walls, is that I see them very differently than most other people. I look at living walls from a different perspective than anybody else that I know. Lots of people understand them because they install them or they sell them. Most don't look at them as critically and deeply as I do. And as a result, as a consultant, I don't have any alliances to products, and so it enables me to be very objective. I look at living walls through the eyes of an inventor and a product designer. I've got 9 patents, all on living wall systems. I've got another 3 patents. I think that's about right. 3 patents that are applied for, haven't got yet. And so, and I've got a few other things, on the drawing board. So I'm always looking at new ways to create innovative systems, whether it's an enhancement to an existing product or an improvement that makes an existing product work better as a living wall, or creating a whole new wall. So I'm always looking at the ease of manufacture, the materials that things are made of, the ease of installation, the materials' effect on labor, and mistakes or lack of mistakes. And then also the system's effect on plant health. You know, is the system designed from the beginning to be something that supports life, or has that not been thought about? And so, you know, everybody, you know, I hear this a lot. Well, you know, you can get the plants to grow. Well, if you didn't design the system right, it's a real dogfight forevermore to try and get the plants to grow. And so from an inventor and a product designer standpoint, I just look at things a whole lot more critically. So why is all this? You know, because the ultimate success of the living wall system is always in the designer's control if one looks at all the variables correctly. And I love this portion of it. So how do walls successfully grow over with plants? What are the common threads of success that we can start to pick apart and analyze so that a designer can improve their confidence with living walls and therefore use them more often? I will tell you that it's the subject of my most recent blog post back on May 11th. I talk about the big living wall questions you need to know and ask. And I've been talking about these in some of my presentations to design firms for a long time. Today's tips are only going to scratch the surface, but they're significant and they're a great place to start for our first webinar. So not all living walls end up alive. So what's needed to provide long-term plant health and ensure the facing is covered in healthy plants? How is that goal achieved? So, yeah, how is that goal achieved? Well, for me, it starts with product selection. And if you get the right product, and it's not like there are bad products, it's just some work better in situations than others. And of course, there are some factors to consider, which we're going to talk about. And if you get that handled on the front end, it's like building the big base of a pyramid, and everything is you know, less difficult as you go on up from there. So the fact is, most systems are designed for structure, and they haven't been thought through for plant culture and long-term plant health. I mean, what we find is that a lot of living wall systems are a line extension of a non-living system, and you know, the vendor is saying, well, you can put some dirt in here in the face and it'll grow stuff. And you know, because a lot of these vendors have great credibility and great success and history with non-living systems that are very structural, you know, people buy into that pretty quickly. And really, if you're going to offer a living wall system, you have to have a business model that's built around living and what all that entails. So successful living systems have to answer these questions. Here's the big questions, you know. So if you're looking at product selection and you've got several different products to choose from, you know, I would say the first question is, what is the media in the face? And if the vendor can't answer that, they're probably not in the living wall business, you know, because they're leaving that to others. Now, who is other? You know, is that the general contractor, the subcontractor? Does it slide all the way down to the laborer or the foreman on the project? And does anybody really know what the media is? You know, the next big question is, you know, how does that media get in the face? So is the system designed in such a way that it's pretty elegant and simple for the construction team in the field to get the right media into the face? And then of course, once it's in the face position, then is it held in place securely, or is it subject to erosion? So the next question would be, how does it stay there? So, you know, plants grow in soil. And so, you know, you'll see a common theme here, you know, it's growing media, soil, growing media, soil, for just about everything. So you've got to get the right media in the face. You've got to get it in a position where you can introduce plant material into that media. You've got to make sure that it's there accurately every time, and it's not up to the whims of the crew that's building it at that moment. Otherwise, every wall they build is going to be different and have different success. And as a designer, you want to count on these things being well thought out and successful every time. How does the media stay there? So is it contained in a way that it's prevented from eroding and leaving the face pretty quickly? How much of it is in there? If you pose that question to a vendor and say, how many cubic feet per square foot of wall face of growing media do you hold securely in the face of your system? If they glaze over and don't have an answer for that, or don't have a cut sheet that immediately addresses it, they're probably not in the living wall business. So that's an important factor to consider there. The next would be, how do plants grow in that media and through it? And by that, I'm saying, let's say that a system is containing their media with, and I've seen this on welded wire walls, where they use a really heavy turf reinforcement mat or some filter fabrics and such. And then they've got the filter fabric behind some Geogrid reinforcements, behind wire, and so forth. Well, can the plants, let's say there's seed in that growing media, can they actually germinate and grow through whatever is covering them and holding them in, or holding the media in? If the intent is to hydroseed or spray seed the face from the outside, once the system is done, how then do you get germination and roots to move into the media? Or is the thing that's holding in the media becoming a barrier to plants growing into it or out of it? The last thing would be, last big thing really, is that plants need water. Can irrigation be added easily? Now, I'll be the first to say, not every living wall needs irrigation, and a lot of living wall applications can't be irrigated for one reason or another. So you have to look at other strategies, which we can talk about in another webinar, for getting plants the water they need when they need it in order to become mature and successful. But when you're asking questions of a vendor that has a system they're proposing as the system you specify, if they haven't thought about irrigation, even to tell you no, we can't irrigate, that indicates that they've thought about it a little bit. But if they know how to add irrigation, if it's possible or desirable, and that method is easy and elegant and doable for the laborer in the field and to do it right every time, then you've probably got a good vendor there. So those are some of the big questions. And of course, this presentation, I'll have a recording of it, which will be posted on my YouTube channel. We'll have this presentation posted on our website, so you'll be able to get back to this if you didn't get great notes. But the big questions, like I said earlier, are most appropriate to structural and landscape living walls, but they also hold true for a lot of the vertical wall systems as well, because it boils down to plants and media and water. So contributors to failure, to kind of summarize it, small media volume would be a contributor. Poor media choice would be a contributing factor to failure. Loss of media from the face, definitely. Barriers to growth, and I talked about that a bit. That's an important one. Incorrect plant choice, I didn't really talk about that so much, and that's the topic of an entire webinar all by itself. And that's assessment of the design intent of the wall, where it is in the world, how the sun tracks on it, and microclimates, species available, and such. So there's a lot to that. Lack of water. What I see happen is I see great care being taken by designers of living walls to create a planting plan. And there's a lot of people that touch that, a lot of experts, horticulturalists, landscape architects, figure out the right plants to plant in this wall. And then the construction schedule comes up, and it's the time to plant this wall is absolutely the worst time to plant the wall seasonally. Perhaps we're going right into the heat of the year where it's not going to rain for 2 months, and everybody wants to close out this segment of the project, and close out their permits and such, and they just want to make sure that the plants are in there and go. Well, everything's going to die. So there is a seasonality to this, and the availability of water and irrigation, even in the short term, can be a very inexpensive insurance policy to make sure that all the thought and the cost that goes into selecting plants and acquiring plants and getting in the face, that they can be nursed through difficult seasons or unexpected climate conditions, a drought that wasn't supposed to be there, cold that wasn't supposed to be there. Well, water and irrigation and its availability can help through that, and then it can be turned off. A lot of these systems work on well-selected, either adapted plants to a region or native plants, and they don't need water forever, but they do need help to get going. The other factor for failure would be no maintenance plan. If nobody's ever considered maintenance, then it's probably going to be a problem, because what happens is the reality is there's always going to be maintenance. If you've got an office complex and they've got turf and they've got planting beds and shrubbery, there's a maintenance plan for that. There's a budget that's assigned to the mowing, the fertilizing, the watering, the trimming, all the care that makes that look good. And a living wall, if it's planned right, doesn't need near the intensity that those things would, but it still needs to be considered, and it needs to be well thought out and executed. So if there's a maintenance plan in place of any kind, then I would say the chances of long-term success of a living wall go up many, many times. So this is a little segment from my blog, but plants grow in soil, and this speaks to those 6 questions that the designers need to ask. The more soil in the face, the better, and great soil appropriate to the plants intended is even better. So vendors have to understand this and communicate it. The next would be, if a product vendor can't show how a large quantity of the right soil gets into the face of their system accurately every time, they're not offering a properly thought out system. And this is not really picking on vendors, but it's really arming well and protecting the designer in this case, so that the walls are successful and the niche flourishes. So potential living wall systems have to securely hold soil that it stays in place long-term, or the plants will not be long-term either. If the soil doesn't stay in the face, the plants aren't going to stay in the face. A qualified living wall system vendor will know exactly how many cubic feet of the right soil is held securely in the face of their systems, or living walls is not really their business model. Well thought out living wall systems have several ways for plants to be introduced into their facings. This is kind of a big one. They could be from seed mixed into the soil during installation, or seed that's blown on the face after installation, or live plugs that are inserted into the face elements, into the media during or after the completion of the wall system. So a vendor's system has to elegantly accommodate the method of introduction that you're choosing, and they can quantify it and stand behind it. So it's a little complicated to talk about all the different ways you introduce plant material into the wall, and every wall system and application is different. And again, we can probably talk about that more in depth in other segments, but it's got to be thought out. And then lastly, and I come back around to this again, the water, key factor, you can use water to overcome poor seasonality of construction, harsh weather patterns, and bring success to the vegetation grow in. So you can't always get irrigation, but there are strategies to get water to living walls when they need them, to nurse them through to be successful. So again, these are a good starting point. And if these matters are addressed early on in product selection, it's really going to take 95% of the difficulty out of the successful implementation of a living wall. So now I'd like to take some time to answer questions if anybody has a question, and that way we make sure that we don't run out of time. And while the questions are gone, I'm going to go ahead and launch this poll, and if you guys would be so kind as to help me out and answer these 7 questions and just give me an idea, you know, what you're seeing and what you're thinking about and what's important to you. I'll close it here in a few minutes, but let's see. I think I have enabled the questions. Let's see. And right now I'm not showing any questions in the interface. So that makes me doubt whether it's working right. Ah, there we go. Andy has asked, Andy has asked if there's a different choice for cut slopes versus fill slopes. You know, I would just say that it really depends on what you want the face to look like and what the plant material you're going to have covering the face. Cut slopes can be more difficult sometimes because a lot of times there's not room to cut them back as far as you'd like to for, let's say, structural elements like geogrid reinforcement. And so it forces you to get a little creative about the system you use. Fill slopes, you know, that would indicate that you've got plenty of room then for structural elements like geogrid reinforcement. And so really any of the facings for a structural or landscape living wall could be in play there. And I'm not advocating for one product over another at this point. I think what I'd like to kind of hang my hat on is how you ask questions of the potential products that you'd like to use to make sure you got the best one. So Andy, if I didn't help out with that, let me know, and I'll keep going. And let's see here, David Hines. Let's see. I'm going to answer David Hines' question live here too. He says, "What success have you seen in arid environments?" And I know there's a lot of development in California and in Arizona, let's say, where you know, you just don't, well, Southern Cal especially, where you just don't get much rain, and it gets a little bit touchy. I've seen some spectacular walls with irrigation, and also with the wise use of plants. Succulents and some of the very, very tough and durable vines in Southern Cal and in Arizona, I've seen do very well in a wall. There was a picture that I had from Southern Cal earlier in the presentation where I was standing next to a short wall. That's a type of a native vine for Southern Cal that virtually needs no water. I don't know how it grows like it grows, but it'll cover over a wall in just a few months and kind of create its own little microclimate and takes very little care. So it's really more about plant selection in the arid environments than anything else. So let's see. That was 2. Let's see, Corey. I'll answer this one live. Have you experienced any rodent or pest infestation in the plantings on living walls? And that's a heck of a question. And it keeps coming up over and over again. I provided some structural living walls for a project in Southwest Missouri, county roadways, and they were significant walls holding up the roadway. And 3 or 4 years down the road, and they'd continued to use more walls from me over the years as they improved more roadways. But at one point they called and they said, you know, we've got rodents living in these walls. And so, that was driving distance, and I drove down there and took a look at it. And they had gotten a complaint from residents. But when we went out and walked the walls, we were never able to find any evidence of any rodents, living in the wall or causing a problem in the wall. And we looked at it several times over the course of a year and kept coming back to it and just never saw it. It came up again in Southern Cal with, rabbits of all things, rabbits and ground squirrels, and a couple of other things. And again, we heard that, and we didn't see it in the wall systems that we were looking at. And I think one of the reasons why is because the wall systems we were looking at, we were using a Filtrex grow sock in the face of those systems. And I think that the containment of the media in that mesh made it very difficult for animals to live in that or to dig in that. I think if it had been bare dirt, it would have been more accessible to the animals. But the fact that, we've got geotextiles in behind there, Geogrid running in there, and then the sock and the mesh in the face, it just presented something that was just inhospitable for the rodents. So anyway, it's definitely possible, and I've heard it. I just haven't physically seen it. See, I'm getting a couple of chats here. Let's see. It says I'm gonna go ahead and end the poll here. Let's see. Somebody's telling me they're not able to submit the poll. Oh. Okay, but the question I've got here is at a university in the Northwest, it was typical for birds to live in the wall. What weight factors one add for birds and mice? How about that? That's interesting. And I think that would be more tailored towards a vertical wall because I don't see weight being a factor in some of the structural and landscape walls. In the vertical walls, we've never added any type of weight factor for anything except, vegetation and saturation. I can't imagine that the birds would add a huge amount, but I guess it has to be looked at. These are all great questions. Gosh, I love it. Let's see, I have a question here. Are there loading concerns with ice storms on trees growing in the wall? That has never been addressed either, and I guess maybe because it's it's fairly new. I mean, this niche hasn't been around forever. Really, I would say that it's not appropriate for trees to be growing in the wall. I have seen trees growing in the wall. Walls without maintenance, there will be volunteer trees that will grow, and if nobody ever goes back and cuts them out of there or does any maintenance, they will get bigger. What I found is that the trees they don't really dislodge anything. Their root system makes the wall quite strong. In fact, all the root systems in the plants make the walls stronger than originally designed anyway. It's almost impossible to get a structural living wall apart if it's full of healthy plants. It really is. But anyway, in terms of the ice storms, if you load up a tree with ice and it's growing in the face of that thing, it probably is going to be a problem. And what I would say is that makes a great argument for a specification that says that trees growing in the wall need to be removed. I don't think anybody ever talks about that or addresses it. John, I would say let me go ahead and say I did that one there. Let's see. John, you've got another one. Are willows acceptable trees in walls in riparian areas? Yes, very much so. And that would be a hybrid because, again, what we did with Filtrex was we used their growing media filled sock, and we laid them on the embankment and then held them down with a lightweight Geogrid reinforcement and earth anchors. And we would intentionally put live willow stakes pounded in through the socks down into the substrate. And that worked quite well. And of course, the willows, don't have any detrimental effect on that type of an application. They might have more of a detrimental effect on a block wall version of a living wall, but we've done those too, and they tend to work out very well. So, and of course, in the riparian areas, you want as much native vegetation and as soft a treatment as possible. So the willows would be great, and they're really doing the job holding the embankment long term. Let's see, and I'm there's some people having some technical issues with the interface. Sorry about that. Let's see. Let me check on some of these other chat messages here. Oh, okay. Joe Maddox asked if I had talked about what the right soil was. And it said, I've heard people say you can use just compost, but I have seen it fail and with just compost in the grow socks. And that's sort of the big deal. It's all about definition. Everybody's definition of compost is different, and compost made everywhere is different. When I talk about compost, I'm talking about compost that's made according to a group that's signatory to the U.S. Composting Council. So they're making it according to their guidelines, and they can provide laboratory analysis and gradations of the particle size and the composition and all the elements of that compost. So for me, if I'm going to use compost, and I think compost is great because it's great for the environment, it's great on the carbon cycle. I mean, there's just no downside to it other than the fact that if you're going to use it, you need to be able to get a gradation report and a lab report that tells you exactly what it is. Does it need to be amended? Is the pH too high or too low? Are there too many fines? Are the particles too big? Do you need to amend it with something else? In the case of some of the vertical living walls, I'll take a good grade of compost, and then I will add in cocoa coir or peat, Canadian peat, and add in maybe some sand or some small granular component or an agricultural perlite. And those are all, adding benefits to that soil for the given application. So I wouldn't say there's ever a right soil because, true soil can be good if it's got the right properties. I'm just a big fan of analysis. Just like in the structural backfill on a retaining wall. I always think that if everybody takes the time and the money to analyze the proposed backfill in the Geogrid zone, and you understand their structural properties better, then it takes the guesswork out and the walls can be designed more lean as a result of that. Well, growing media soil is the same way. With some proper analysis, you can dial it in and have better success and not waste any money on things. Let's see. Yes, okay, so you clarified it was a vertical wall attached to a building. And, all the vertical wall systems that I know of, they do publish a saturated weight per square foot that they apply to a wall so that loading can be checked. And I would think that, if you've got an area of high concern with birds and creatures living in that wall, they are going to add some weight, and it has to be looked at. So I guess we need to see how critical it is to that wall. I mean, if a system, let's say, adds 25 pounds per square foot of face to that wall, is that pretty easily borne by the existing structural wall, or is it take it right out to the ragged edge? So I guess it's only as critical as what the wall is. Let's see, got a couple of other questions here. Oh, okay, that's what it is. So you have to answer all the questions to submit the poll. So I did not understand that. Fortunately, there's only 7 questions, which is good. Okay. And I'm going to go ahead and share the poll results. So you could see them, and then I could probably, I can't see the poll results really, percentages. I'll look at those later, and I can share those with anybody if they're interested. Let's see. Got a couple more questions here. Okay. Okay, D, I thought that one would need to use green roof media for the living wall. Please advise use the term living wall to mean a vertical wall in a building. Yeah, okay. Well, and you're right. I mean, early on in this presentation, I did mention, and maybe not as clearly as I should, that there's just such a broad range of living walls. At Filtrex, when people would call my office and say, hey, I've got a question about a living wall, we would quickly say, which kind? You know, is it structural? Is it landscape? Is it vertical? Is it a slope? Is it inside a building, outside of a building? And yeah, green roof media could be a good starting spot. I will tell you that we provided vertical living walls outside of a building on the sunny side. And a lot of times a good plant choice for that is a succulent. And succulents are probably the top choice for green roofs. So we would fill our containers with a green roof media that was appropriate to the succulents that we were going to put in there. So that's true. But we didn't use green roof media very often because green roof media doesn't hold much water for very long. It's made to be very free draining and lightweight. And a lot of times on our vertical living wall systems, the ones I've been around, weight really wasn't that critical of an issue, and we did need to hold some moisture over a period of time so that we didn't have to irrigate constantly. Of course, there are systems that don't use any soil or media of any kind. They're basically bare root in a pocket, and those are irrigated quite a lot. So I guess a topic for a future webinar would be to really break down all the different subcategories of living wall, and especially all those that exist within the vertical realm. Okay. And then, yeah, the terms for the highway bridge wall, that would be, I would call that a structural living wall. So, all right. And then let's see, we've got one more question. I'll answer this live, and then I'm going to close that out and go on and finish the last couple of slides and get out of here. So I want to be mindful of everybody's time. So Pega, you've asked, in case of indoor living wall, what is the strategy to control moisture and mold issues? And I would tell you that you know, the wall, the actual substrate wall, structural wall on the building needs to be waterproofed so that there's no water that gets on that and absorbs into it. And then there always has to be a place for moisture to go. So that would be either a basin or a drain at the bottom of it. And then my strategy is to water as minimally as possible, not to overwater and not to hold a lot of water in the system long term. It needs to water lightly and infrequently, and have a little bit of residual water holding so that the plants can absorb the water and then transpire it, and then be relatively dry. On an indoor application, a lot of the indoor tropical plants like to be dry. Actually being wet too often causes problems with mold and root rot and disease and fungus. And so the plant maintenance companies will always tell you that you really want that wall to dry down before you water it again. And that's a great strategy that's good for plant health, but it's also good for the conditions you talked about. And that's also something that we could roll up in another webinar series and get more of a deep dive on. So thanks for your question. All right, let me, let's see. Let me close this out, close out the questions. I've still got the chat on. And then let me go back over here and let's move forward on this. So we did the 7 questions. Thanks so much for working with me on the polling. So future webinar topics for those that are still with me, you know, how to promote to clients. I think from a designer standpoint, you know, if you get good with these things, you'd like to see your clients use them. And a lot of times you propose a living wall if you're a fan of them, and the client says, no, I'm not interested. So how do you successfully promote those types of systems to clients? What are the costs and then the real benefits, and what's the analysis of the two with regard to a living wall? Maintenance strategies, that's a big one, especially when you break it out across all the different types of living wall. Job site installation issues. Now, I've always followed my projects to the job and given assistance to the contractors and the laborers to make sure that they were successful. Not everybody does that or has done it. I think that's a big item to talk about, going from the design board to the field to completion. Another topic would be a deep dive by wall type. And the last one would be sorting out all the vertical offerings, because there are so many different ways to make a vertical wall. And what I'm hearing from the Q&A and the chat is that soil and, you know, what constitutes good blended media is a great topic, something for a deep dive. So thank you for letting me know that. And let's see. I guess my aim here is not just for me to be the advocate, but for you to become an advocate of living walls and take advantage of more vertical space. So I hope this webinar was a good start for that. And I hope you'll join our, let's see if this actually goes a little further. I hope you'll join our monthly webinars, view our web-based offerings, reach out to us for questions. And increase your understanding of living walls, and add us to your project team as a consultant that can guide through proper selection and execution of living walls. Thank you so much for joining the webinar today. I think it was a good first run, and I got a lot out of the interaction. It really made this a great presentation from my standpoint, and it helps me to hone what we're going to do in the future. So thank you very much. I've got links to my blog post here in this last slide. And it's just as easy as going to the greenwallventures.com website and clicking on the blog. And thanks for attending Living Wall Success.